At my granddaughter's wedding, I caught sight of the name tag pinned to my jacket. Instead of my name, it read, "The old man footing the bill for everything." Right beneath that, in smaller print, it said, "Glad you could make it." My stomach tightened. Before we continue, please subscribe to stay updated on our latest stories. I had always thought family gatherings were supposed to bring joy. My granddaughter Heather's wedding was meant to be one of those golden days, the kind you treasure forever. But that celebration turned into the moment I realized how my own family really viewed me. The morning of the wedding, I took extra care getting dressed. I am 65 now. I am not the type to fuss over appearances, but I wanted to look sharp. I chose a pale blue suit my late wife, Ruth, had always liked. I combed my gray hair neatly, polished my shoes until they shone, and even dabbed on a touch of the cologne she had given me for our last anniversary together, before cancer claimed her 3 years back. "You look good, Dale," I muttered to my reflection, hearing Ruth's voice in my head as though she were right there beside me. For a moment, I almost felt her presence at my shoulder. The ceremony at Trinity Episcopal Church was beautiful. Heather glowed as she walked down the aisle, joy radiating from her face. My son Graham stood tall with pride as he escorted her, and even my daughter-in-law Diane looked moved, wiping her eyes. For those few minutes, everything seemed perfect. It was the reception that ruined it. I stepped into the grand ballroom of the Grandview Manor, where a young woman was handing out name tags and table cards. She smiled politely as she shuffled through the stack. "Here you go, Mr. Mitchell," she said, passing me my card. I glanced down, expecting to see Dale Mitchell, grandfather of the bride. Instead, written in neat calligraphy were the words, "The old man paying for everything, pal." My hand froze. This had to be some mistake. "Is something wrong?" the young woman asked, noticing my face. I forced a tight smile. "Looks like there's been a mix-up with my tag." She leaned over to check. Her eyes widened. "Oh, I am terribly sorry. Let me see if there is another one." "That is all right," I told her quickly. The last thing I wanted was to stir trouble at Heather's big day. I pinned the insulting tag to my jacket and walked inside, my cheeks hot with embarrassment. Had Heather seen this? Graham or Diane? Who thought this was a joke worth printing? I tried to mingle during the cocktail hour, forcing conversation with guests who either ignored the words on my tag or were too polite to bring it up. But then I overheard a whisper that cut me to the bone. "Did you notice the grandfather's tag?" Someone chuckled. Another voice answered. "Diane said they thought it would be hilarious. They call him their personal cash machine." I turned away fast, my hands trembling. Just then, Graham spotted me. "Dad," he called out across the room. "Come meet the Sterlings. You used to golf with Carl." Reluctantly, I walked over. Carl Sterling looked faintly familiar, probably one of Ruth's or my old business acquaintances. "Dad, this is Carl and Janet Sterling," Graham said, grinning, "and this here is our walking bank account." Janet's smile faltered as her eyes flicked down to the tag on my jacket. Carl shifted uncomfortably. "Dale Mitchell," I said firmly, extending my hand. "Ruth's widower." "Of course," Carl said kindly, clasping my hand. "Ruth spoke of you often. She was proud of you." The conversation blurred after that. When the Sterlings moved along, I pulled Graham aside. "What is this supposed to mean?" I asked, tapping the tag. Graham laughed. "Oh, Dad, come on, don't take it so seriously. Everyone knows you're the one with the money now, since Mom left you everything. It is just a little joke." "It is humiliating," I said, my voice low. "Oh, lighten up. It is a wedding. Have a drink. Relax." Before I could reply, Diane drifted over in her elegant mother-of-the-bride gown. "There you are, Dale. Has Graham been showing you around? We want everyone to know who made this beautiful day possible." She gave me a wink, and the two of them laughed. I excused myself quickly and headed for the restroom. Inside, I splashed water on my face and patted my eyes with a paper towel. As I steadied myself, the door cracked open. An older man in a well-cut suit stepped in, then backed out, apologizing. "Mr. Mitchell, Dale?" he called gently from the hall. It was Douglas Webb, Ruth's old attorney. He had managed Ruth's estate after she passed and had always been decent to me. I could not help but notice. He gestured toward my name tag and shook his head. "And some of the things people have been saying." I sighed. "Apparently it is all just a joke." Douglas's expression darkened. "It is not funny, and Ruth would have been furious." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. There is something you need to know. Something Ruth made me promise not to reveal unless the time came. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out an envelope. This is an addition to Ruth's will. She had it written shortly before she passed. I tore open the envelope with shaky hands and scanned the pages. The legal wording was thick and formal, but the message could not have been clearer. Any child or grandchild who publicly humiliated me would lose every dime of their share in Ruth's estate. And that estate turned out to be much bigger than even I had ever known. I looked up at Douglas, stunned. Why on earth didn't Ruth tell me? Douglas lowered his voice. She was hoping it would never come to this. She wanted your family to treat you with respect because they loved you, not because they feared losing money. I glanced toward the ballroom where laughter and music floated out, my family celebrating, blissfully unaware that their cruelty had just cost them millions. What do you want to do about it? Douglas asked. I folded the papers with care and gave them back. Nothing. Not yet. I needed to see how far they were willing to push me. When I walked back into the reception, the little name tag on my chest felt heavier than ever. But now it did not weigh me down with shame. Instead, it sparked something harder inside me. Determination. Determination to face who my family really was. The morning after Heather's wedding, I sat at my kitchen table in a rumpled bathrobe, staring at the offensive name tag I had laid in front of me. Its neat, elegant letters mocked me. The old man paying for everything. I traced the words with my finger, thinking about what Ruth would have said if she had seen it. My wife rarely lost her temper, but when she did, it was fierce, especially if someone disrespected her family. They have changed, I whispered into the empty kitchen, half imagining Ruth could hear me. Or maybe they were always like this, and we just chose not to see it. I wandered into the living room and looked up at the big family portrait hanging over the fireplace. It was taken 5 years earlier, at our 40th anniversary. Ruth sat in the middle, still strong, despite the sickness quietly taking root inside her. I stood at her side with my hand resting on her shoulder. Graham and Diane flanked us, and in front stood Heather and her brother Brett, both still teenagers back then. We looked happy. We looked like a family. When had that picture stopped being the truth? The question gnawed at me as I made a cup of tea. Maybe the shift had been slow, so gradual that I did not see the respect slipping away until it was gone. The first time I really noticed was about 6 months after Ruth's funeral. Graham and Diane had invited me over for dinner, rare even then. They had been unusually warm, asking about how I was holding up, reminiscing about Ruth. But when dessert was served, the real reason came out. Dad, Graham said as he refilled my wine glass, Diane and I have been thinking about redoing our kitchen. Nothing fancy, just new appliances, countertops, that sort of thing. That sounds nice, I answered, not realizing what was coming next. The thing is, Diane added smoothly, between tuition for the kids and other expenses, things are a little tight right now. Then came the pause. Then the expectant looks. You are asking me for money? I said. Not asking, Graham replied quickly. But since Mom left you well taken care of, we thought maybe you would want to help out the family. That night, I wrote them a check for $25,000. Looking back, I know now that was the start of it all. Small asks turned into bigger ones. That kitchen remodel grew into a full-blown renovation. Tuition help became brand new luxury cars for Heather and Brett when they turned 18. Vacations that I was invited to attend but also expected to pay for became a regular thing. One morning, I pulled a cardboard box from the hallway closet and spread my financial records across the floor. Sitting there cross-legged, I sifted through bank statements and old checks, adding it up. The numbers were staggering. In 3 years, I had handed Graham and Diane nearly $200,000. The phone rang, jolting me. It was Diane. Dale, are you home? I have been calling your cell phone. I realized my cell was still tucked in the pocket of last night's suit jacket. Yes, I am home. What is it? Oh, nothing urgent, she said in that syrupy voice I had come to recognize. Graham and I just wanted to thank you for everything yesterday. Wasn't the wedding beautiful? Yes, I said carefully. It was lovely. Heather and Scott are so grateful for your generosity. They never could have had such a wedding without you. I closed my eyes, remembering the $35,000 check I had written for the venue and catering. I was glad to help, I said. Actually, that is partly why I called, Diane went on, her tone honey-sweet but sharp underneath. Scott's parents were supposed to cover the honeymoon, but his father's business is struggling and they had to pull out. Heather is devastated. She and Scott set on 2 weeks in Bali. In Bali. I could see it coming from a mile away. We were wondering if you might help out. Of course, Graham and I would contribute, but after all we spent on the wedding, all they spent? I thought bitterly. I had paid for nearly all of it. I will think about it, I said, surprising even myself with how flat my voice sounded. Oh, she said, caught off guard. Well, they need to book soon to lock in the rates. I understand. I will let you know tomorrow. After hanging up, I turned back to the pile of records. Ruth had warned me once about Graham's way of thinking. He sees money as the solution to every problem, she had said. But money without values just creates more problems. I had not understood it then. Or maybe I had chosen not to. A knock at the door startled me. I peered through the peephole and saw my grandson Brett shifting nervously on the porch. I quickly scooped up the scattered financial papers, shoved them back into the closet, and opened the door. Grandpa, he said, stepping forward to hug me. At 22, he was tall like me, with the same kind eyes. Are you all right? I have been texting you. I am fine, son. Just tired after yesterday. Come in. He followed me into the kitchen, and I set the kettle on for tea. Brett had always stood apart from the rest, more thoughtful, less obsessed with money and appearances. I wanted to apologize for yesterday, he said, settling at the table. The name tag, the way everyone was talking, it was wrong. A lump formed in my throat. You noticed? Of course I noticed, he said. So did a lot of people. I should have said something. I patted his hand. That is not your burden, correcting your parents, but it is mine to call out what is wrong. He met my eyes. Dad and Mom have changed since Grandma passed. Or maybe I just did not see it before. All they talk about is money. Your money. What do you mean? I asked. Brett hesitated. Last week I overheard them talking about this house. Dad said it was too big for one person and that they could help you downsize. The kettle whistled, giving me a moment to take that in. As I poured the water over the tea bags, I thought about Douglas Webb, about the codicil in Ruth's will, about that name tag, the constant requests for cash, and now this. Schemes to move me out of my home. Grandpa? Brett's voice pulled me back. Are you sure you are all right? I set the teapot down and sat across from him. I'm better than all right, Brett. For the first time in years, I think I see things clearly. What do you mean? He asked. I smiled, a decision already forming. Just that it is time for some changes around here. As we sipped our tea, I studied my grandson's face, wondering if he was truly different from his parents, or if the same seeds of entitlement lay inside him too, just waiting for the right soil to grow. For the first time since Ruth died, a cold clarity replaced my grief. I would not make hasty choices, but I would be watching and waiting to see who in this family truly deserved the legacy she left behind. 3 days after the wedding, Graham and Diane hosted a post-wedding brunch at their country club. I debated going, but decided curiosity outweighed my reluctance. I wanted to know if that name tag had been a one-off mistake or part of something deeper. I arrived at the Riverside Country Club in a simple cream suit Ruth always said made me look sharp. Inside the private dining room, I spotted several wedding guests, Heather and her new husband Scott, Brett, and a handful of relatives and friends. Dad! Over here, Graham called, waving me toward the head table. Diane, glowing in a designer dress worth more than most folks' monthly paycheck, leaned in with an air kiss. Dale, you look nice, she said, surprised. We saved you a seat right here. I sat down, noticing they had placed me next to Scott's parents, people I barely knew, instead of with my grandkids. The brunch rolled on until Diane tapped her glass for attention. We want to thank everyone for coming today and for helping make Heather and Scott's wedding such a wonderful occasion, she began. And of course, a very special thank you to Grandpa Dale, whose generosity made it all possible. Every eye turned toward me. Diane's smile thinned as she continued. We are thrilled to announce that Grandpa will also be funding Heather and Scott's dream honeymoon to Bali. A polite round of applause broke out. I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. I had made no such promise. Dad? Graham prompted, waiting for me to nod along. I set my cup down carefully. This is the first I have heard of it. I said evenly. The table fell silent. Heather looked startled, then embarrassed. Scott stared down at his plate. Well, Diane said with a brittle laugh, we talked about it yesterday, remember? You said you would think about it. Yes, I answered, and I am still thinking. Graham leaned toward me, voice low but loud enough for the table to hear. Dad, do not make a scene. We already told them to go ahead and book the trip. Something inside me snapped. A thread stretched thin for years finally broke. I do not recall agreeing to pay for a honeymoon in Bali, I said clearly, so there was no mistaking my words. As I remember, that was Scott's parents' responsibility. Scott's father shifted uncomfortably. There were some business setbacks, he muttered. I understand, I said kindly. Things happen, but it is not right to volunteer another person's money without their say-so. Do you not agree? The whole table went silent. Diane's face turned red. Perhaps Heather and Scott could consider a more modest honeymoon, I suggested, one within their means. Diane hissed back, What about your means? Everyone knows Ruth left you more than comfortable. The tone in her voice, entitled and bitter, snapped something inside me. My finances are not up for public discussion, I said firmly, and neither are my choices. Graham clamped a hand on my arm, squeezing hard. Dad, stop it. You are embarrassing us. I pulled away. No, Graham, you embarrassed yourselves. I stood, smoothing my jacket. Heather, Scott, I wish you both every happiness. I will gladly discuss helping with a reasonable honeymoon, but privately, not like this. As I turned, Brett rose too. I will walk you out, Grandpa. In the lobby, away from the crowd, my hands shook as I fumbled for my keys. You okay to drive? Brett asked gently. I nodded, steadying myself. I am fine. Just shaken. You should be proud, he said. That took courage. I looked at him, really looked. For a moment he reminded me so much of Ruth it hurt. Come for dinner tonight? I asked on impulse. Brett smiled. I would like that. That evening, over roast chicken in my kitchen, I told him the truth about his parents, the endless demands, the slow erosion of respect. I am not surprised, he said sadly. After Grandma died, they started treating you like an ATM. I nodded. And it is only getting worse. He hesitated. Last week I heard them talking about your house again. They want you to move into Meadowbrook Estates. The retirement home? My stomach dropped. That house was my sanctuary, built with Ruth over a lifetime. Brett added quietly, Dad said the market is hot, that they could help you maximize your investment. So it was not just my money. They wanted my home too. Brett, there is something you should know, I began, ready to share the codicil Ruth had left. But before I could, the doorbell rang. Graham's car sat in the driveway. It is your father, I muttered. You do not have to open it, Brett said, jaw tight. But I was done hiding. No, time to clear the air. Graham shoved past me, face red. What the hell was that stunt at brunch? Then he spotted Brett. What are you doing here? Having dinner with Grandpa, Brett replied evenly. Something you should try without asking for money. Graham's eyes narrowed. Stay out of this. This is between your father and me. No, I said firmly. If we are talking, Brett stays. I am tired of secrets. Let us lay it all out. Graham paced the room like a caged dog. I have had enough of your attitude, Dad. First you embarrass us at brunch, now you are poisoning Brett against us. I sat calm in Ruth's old chair, hands folded. Brett leaned on the fireplace, arms crossed, his eyes full of disappointment. No one is poisoning anyone, I said. We are simply naming what has been happening since your mother died. And what is that? Graham snapped. You and Mom treat Grandpa like a bank, not family, Brett said before I could answer. The name tag at the wedding, pushing him to pay for Bali, talking about selling his house behind his back. Graham flushed. So you've been spying on us? I have been paying attention, Brett shot back. Graham turned to me, softening his tone. Dad, you are misunderstanding. We are just trying to help you manage your money wisely. You are not getting any younger. I am 66, not 96, I cut in. My mind is sharp, and I can handle my own affairs. But Mom left you so much. Enough, I raised my hand. Ruth left me exactly what she meant to. Her estate is not your piggy bank. His smile vanished. So what now? You cut us off because Diane made one stupid joke. I am saying from now on, I will decide what happens with my money and my home. If Heather and Scott want a Bali honeymoon, they can save for it like other young couples. If you and Diane want a bigger house, you can earn it. Graham looked at me like I had started speaking another language. Then he turned to Brett. I want to talk to my father alone. I am staying, Brett said firmly. This is family business. Exactly. Brett shot back, and I am family. I saw something shift in Graham's eyes. He was recalculating. Alone, he could always twist me around, use guilt, grief, or my need for peace. With Brett watching, those tricks would not work. Fine, he snapped, storming toward the door. But this is not over, Dad, not by a long shot. When the door closed, Brett let out a long breath. I am sorry, Grandpa. For what? You did nothing wrong. For not speaking up sooner, for letting them treat you like this. I pulled him into a hug. You are speaking up now. That is what matters. After he left, I sat alone in the silence, thinking about Ruth, about the codicil, and about the family we had raised. Had we failed Graham somewhere along the way, or had this entitlement always been part of him? The bigger question was, what should I do now? Slowly, the answer came. Instead of waving the codicil in their faces, which would only scare them into false respect, I would let them reveal themselves. Meanwhile, I would quietly take back my independence. The next morning, I called Douglas Webb. Dale, he said warmly, I hoped you would call after the wedding. I told him about the brunch and Graham's angry visit. I need to know exactly what Ruth left behind, not just the codicil, the whole picture. Better we discuss this in person, Douglas said. That afternoon, I sat across from him in his polished office as he went through everything. The numbers stunned me. Ruth built several companies, sold them at the right time, and invested carefully. Her portfolio weathered every downturn, Douglas explained. I knew we were comfortable, I muttered. But this, Douglas smiled. She told me often, you married her when she had nothing but potential and an old Chevy. She never wanted you to feel trapped in wealth or judged by it. I chuckled softly. That sounds just like her. As for the codicil, Douglas continued, it is simple but powerful. Any descendant who humiliates you in public loses their inheritance. The wedding name tag alone qualifies, the brunch too. But you do not need to act immediately. The codicil stands for your lifetime. I nodded slowly. And if I want to make my own adjustments to my will, to how my assets are handled, what changes are you thinking of? Douglas asked. By the time I walked out, I had a plan. No shouting matches, no ultimatums, just a quiet reclaiming of my life. First, I called my old friend Helen to arrange lunch. We had not met in years. Then I stopped by the community center and picked up a brochure for their adult classes. Ruth had always pushed me to keep at my painting. Maybe it was finally time. That night, I sat down at my computer and started reading about small business loans. Brett had once mentioned wanting to open a bookstore after college, but worried about the startup costs. Putting money behind his dream felt like a far better use of my resources than funding endless vacations and renovations. When the phone rang and Diane's name flashed on the screen, I let it roll to voicemail. The old Dale would have answered immediately, anxious about what demand or emergency was waiting, but that man was gone. In his place stood someone learning to recognize his own worth. Later, I listened. Diane's voice was smooth, almost rehearsed. Dale, it's Diane. Graham told me about your talk last night. I think there's been a misunderstanding. We've always wanted what's best for you. Graham and I thought we could have dinner this weekend to clear the air. Oh, and Heather mentioned you might reconsider the honeymoon? They really need to book soon to get the best rates. Call me back. I deleted the message without answering. Instead, I opened my checkbook and wrote a modest gift for Heather and Scott, enough for a pleasant trip, maybe New England, but not Bali. I slipped the check into a card with a warm note and sealed it. That was the start of my new approach. No fights, no drama, just firm boundaries. Ruth would have approved. The next 6 months passed in a blur of steady change. I enrolled in painting classes at the community center, reconnected with old friends, and spent more time with Brett, who visited often. I helped him with seed money for his bookstore plan, which was starting to look promising. Graham and Diane's behavior swung between cold distance and clumsy attempts to cozy back up. When ignoring me didn't work, they would suddenly drop by with forced smiles. Within minutes, the conversation always turned to money. Their house projects, Heather wanting to buy, or their own retirement. Every time I gave the same reply, smiling as I said it, I am not discussing my finances. They didn't take it well. Diane's texts turned sharp, Graham's calls more demanding. But I had finally found strength in silence and in the walls I was building around my life. When my 67th birthday came around, Brett insisted on hosting a small gathering at my house. "It's time they remember whose home this is," he said, with a grit that reminded me of Ruth. That morning, I worked in my garden, trimming roses and finding peace in the simple task. The garden had suffered during the years I spent catering to Graham and Diane's demands. Now it was thriving again, just like me. By afternoon, the house was ready. Brett arrived early to set out snacks. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked, arranging a platter. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, smoothing my new red shirt, bold and confident, something I never would have worn before. "Besides, it's just dinner." We both knew it was more than that. For the first time in months, the entire family would sit under my roof, Graham and Diane, Heather and Scott, and even a few of Ruth's old friends, including Douglas Webb. The doorbell rang at 5 sharp. Graham and Diane stood there, their smiles so forced they looked painted on. "Happy birthday, Dad," Graham said, handing me a bouquet of store-bought flowers. "You look different," Diane added, her eyes flicking over my shirt, my styled hair, the touch of makeup I had learned to apply in class. "Thank you," I said simply, stepping back to let them in. Heather and Scott arrived soon after, followed by Douglas and another couple who had been close friends of ours. I moved through the greetings calmly, something I never could have done 6 months earlier. At the table, I noticed Graham's eyes scanning the house, assessing. Diane's gaze kept going back to the new painting on the wall, a landscape I had painted myself. "Did you redecorate, Dale?" she asked, her tone uneasy. "Just a few updates. I've been taking painting classes." "Painting classes?" Graham repeated, like I'd said I was piloting a spaceship. "Grandpa's good at it," Brett said proudly. "He's already sold 2 pieces at the community art fair." "Sold?" Diane blinked. "But why would you need to sell paintings?" "It's not about need," I said with a smile. It's about joy." The room went quiet until Scott asked Brett about the bookstore. "It's coming along great," Brett said. "Thanks to Grandpa, I've got the business plan finished and I'm looking at locations." Graham's head snapped up. "Thanks to Grandpa? What's that supposed to mean?" Brett held his father's gaze. "He's investing in my bookstore." "Investing?" Graham's voice sharpened. "With what money?" "My money," I said evenly. Graham's mouth opened, then shut again as he realized the other guests were listening. He forced a tight smile. "Maybe we should discuss this privately, Dad." "There's nothing to discuss," I said flatly. "I make my own financial decisions now." Graham's face darkened. He looked ready to explode, but Heather jumped in, changing the subject with a story about their trip to Cape Cod, the place they had chosen for their honeymoon after I'd sent them my modest gift. The tension broke for the moment. Later, as folks drifted into the living room for coffee and dessert, Diane cornered me in the kitchen. "Dale, what's going on with you?" she hissed. "First, you refuse to pay for the honeymoon, then we don't hear from you for months, and now you're throwing money at Brett's silly bookstore idea." "It isn't silly," I said calmly. "He's got a solid business plan." "Don't be naive. Bookstores aren't profitable anymore. He's using you." "No, Diane. I'm backing my grandson's ambition. That's different." Her eyes narrowed. "Graham and I think it's time you move somewhere more manageable. Meadowbrook Estates has lovely apartments. If you sold this house, it would help all of us." So Brett had been right. Their plan was out in the open. "This house isn't for sale," I said firmly, "and where I live is not up for discussion." Before she could snap back, Graham appeared in the doorway. "Everything all right in here?" "Just fine," I said, lifting the cake I'd baked that morning. "Shall we have dessert?" Back in the living room, as I cut slices, Graham cleared his throat. "Before we move on, Dad, there's something Diane and I want to talk about." I froze, the knife in my hand. This wasn't in the evening's plan. "We're concerned about Dad's decision-making," Graham announced. "He's making reckless choices, shutting us out, refusing family guidance." The room went silent. "We think it's time to consider a power of attorney," he added, "for his own protection." Douglas Webb set his cup down with deliberate care. "That's a serious step, Graham. Do you have proof of diminished capacity?" "He's funding a bookstore in the digital age," Graham said bitterly. "He refuses sensible downsizing. Isn't that proof enough?" I felt an unexpected calm. I'd known this moment was coming since the day I first told him no. "Your father seems perfectly competent to me." Douglas said evenly. Bad decisions in your eyes aren't proof of incapacity. You don't understand, Graham snapped. He always leaned on Mom, then on me. Now suddenly he's making irrational choices. Enough, I said, setting down the knife. I am not irrational. I am not incapacitated, and I don't need your guidance. Dad, be reasonable. I've been reasonable for 3 years, I cut him off. I've paid for your renovations, your vacations, your cars, your daughter's wedding. I've let you treat me like a bank instead of a father. That ends tonight. Graham's face turned red. Is this what you want, to humiliate us in front of everyone? To make us out as villains? No, Graham, I said quietly. You manage that on your own. You selfish old man, he spat, pushing up from his chair so hard it nearly toppled. After everything we've done for you. Graham, Diane tugged at his sleeve, suddenly aware of how this looked to the others, but he ignored her. You think you can just cut us off? Mom would be ashamed of you. That was when Douglas cleared his throat, his voice calm but cutting. Actually, Graham, your mother anticipated this very situation. The room went still. Graham froze, his mouth hanging open, as Douglas reached into his jacket and pulled out the familiar envelope. Ruth added a codicil to her will before she passed, Douglas explained. She worried about how Dale might be treated once she was gone. What codicil? Diane blurted, finding her voice first. Douglas glanced at me for permission. I nodded. It states that any descendant who publicly humiliates Dale loses their inheritance, Douglas said steadily. That includes disrespecting him, trying to control his finances, or forcing him out of his home. That's ridiculous. Graham stammered. Mom would never. She did, Douglas cut him off, and as executor, I've been documenting incidents these past months. Then he turned to me. Dale, do you want to enforce the codicil? Every eye in the room shifted to me. Graham and Diane's faces had gone pale, their shock plain. Heather looked embarrassed, confused. Brett met my gaze with quiet support. Yes, I said finally. I do. Graham collapsed back into his chair, all the fight drained out of him. You cannot be serious, Graham spat. I have never been more serious, I replied. The name tag at the wedding, the public announcement about paying for the honeymoon, the endless demands for money, and now trying to label me incompetent, all of it ends today. Our inheritance, Diane whispered, is gone, Douglas confirmed. All of it? Heather asked in a small voice. I am afraid so, Douglas said. The codicil leaves no room for doubt. This is not fair, Graham shouted, slamming his fist on the table. He tricked us. He let us believe the money was there for us. No, Graham, I said quietly. I never promised you anything. You assumed, you took, you demanded. But not once did you ask what I needed or wanted. What about Heather and Scott? Diane asked desperately. They did nothing. Douglas checked his notes. Heather was present at several incidents but did not directly participate. Still, she never defended Dale. Heather's eyes filled with tears. I am sorry, Grandpa. I should have said something at the wedding about that tag. I reached across and took her hand. We all make mistakes, sweetheart. What matters is whether we learn from them. So what happens now? Scott asked. According to the codicils, Douglas explained, Graham and Diane's share is redistributed. Half goes to Dale directly. The other half is divided among those who have shown him respect. Every eye turned to Brett. He looked stunned. I swear, Grandpa, I didn't know about any of this. I know, I told him, and your grandmother would be proud of the man you are becoming. Graham shot to his feet, his face twisted with anger. This is a setup, a conspiracy. I will contest it in court. You are welcome to try, Douglas said calmly, but the codicil is binding and the evidence is overwhelming. Dale, Diane said suddenly, her voice syrupy sweet, surely we can work this out as a family. We never meant. Save it, Diane, I cut her off. It is too late. So that is it? Graham barked. After everything we have done for you, you just cut us off? No, Graham, I said, standing to face him. After everything I have done for you, I am finally standing up for myself. That is the difference. The evening ended soon after. Heather and Scott left with awkward apologies. Graham and Diane stormed out. Douglas and the other guests made polite exits until it was just Brett and me. You okay? He asked, helping me clear the untouched dessert plates. I am better than okay, I said, surprised at how true it felt. I feel free. 1 year later, I stood in the doorway of the Bookhaven, the bookstore Brett had opened in a renovated Victorian downtown. Morning light streamed through tall windows, shining across shelves of books and cozy reading nooks. A coffee counter, run by his girlfriend Megan, served local coffee and fresh pastries. In the children's section, a mural I had painted covered one wall, an enchanted forest with hidden animals and fairy houses. Twice a week, I read stories to neighborhood kids, something I never imagined I would do. Upstairs, Brett had turned the small apartment into a residence for young writers. He funded it with part of his inheritance. My house remained mine, full of Ruth's memory and my life's story. The bell over the door jingled, and Heather came in with a stroller. Inside was her 3-month-old daughter, Delia, named for her grandfather. "Grandpa," Heather said, spotting me. "I did not know you would be here." "Just dropping off some bookmarks I painted," I said, bending to greet the baby. "Hello, little one." Over the year, Heather and I had rebuilt our bond. She had started reaching out on her own, without Graham or Diane pulling the strings. Scott encouraged her to form her own opinions, and I respected him for it. Graham and Diane were another story. After failing to challenge the codicil, they had moved to Florida, where Graham took a job with an old associate. We spoke only through stiff holiday cards and the occasional update passed along by Heather. "Have you heard from your parents?" I asked as she sat with the baby. "Mom called last week," Heather sighed. "Same old complaints, Dad's job, the smaller house, how unfair life is." "I am sorry," I said softly. "Don't be," Heather answered firmly. "They made their choices. I had made my choice." Megan came over with coffee and fresh scones, fussing over the baby before heading back to the counter. A moment later, Brett stepped out from the back carrying a stack of new arrivals. His face lit up when he spotted us. "Perfect timing," he said, sliding into the chair. "I wanted to run something by you both." He laid out his plan, expanding the store's community programs with adult literacy tutoring and writing workshops for teenagers. "It would mean reinvesting some of the profits," he admitted. "But I think it's worth it. I think it's wonderful," I told him, pride swelling in my chest. As he and Heather discussed the details, I looked around the bookstore. Sunlight poured through tall windows, spilling over the shelves, the reading nooks, the mural on the wall. This wasn't just Brett's dream. It had become a fresh chapter for all of us. The past year had awakened parts of me I thought were gone. I had made new friends, poured myself into painting, even started traveling again. At first, just short weekend trips, then 2 weeks in Italy with a senior tour group. That was where I met Victor, a widower from Boston with kind eyes and a dry wit. Now he called me every Sunday. Ruth would have approved, not just of the bookstore or my independence, but of the fact that I had finally learned to draw boundaries. She had tried to protect me with her codicil, but in the end, I had learned to protect myself. The baby let out a cheerful gurgle, pulling me back into the moment. This was my family now, not perfect, not whole, but real. From the wreckage of disappointment and betrayal, we had built something new, and it was beautiful. "What do you think, Grandpa?" Brett asked, drawing me into the conversation. I looked at him, at Heather, at the little one who carried our future, at the bookstore that had been born from respect instead of greed. "I think," I said, smiling, "that this is exactly where we're supposed to be." To hear the next story, click the box on the left. And as always, thank you for watching.